All right, Brar, good to see you again. It was so great to connect with you again a few weeks back. As you and I discussed, one of the things that I love to do is a podcast for Conscious Capitalism, and I call it the Conscious Corner. And Brar, for you and others that may be listening for the first time, I used to love playing baseball as a kid, and I was very fortunate growing up in New York. I used to play right next to Yankee Stadium as a kid. Great experience. But I love third base. And if you are familiar with baseball, you know that third base is referred to the hot corner. So Conscious Corner is kind of the idea of hot topics, things that might be on people's mind today, certainly as it's related to conscious capitalism, but certainly things that are relevant, I hope, and what's going on in our communities today. So I just want to thank you again for being part of this. And before we jump into some specifics, if you wouldn't mind, maybe just a couple minutes, if you will, or less if you need, maybe a little bit more if you need. Just tell us a little bit about you and give us a little context before we get started.
Sure, absolutely. So thank you, first of all, for inviting me. I'm excited about this. And hopefully the conversation we're about to have would give some ideas to others and expand their horizon in ways that they didn't imagine it would. So that's hopefully my goal. But I've been in the management consulting realm for about 30 years now. I was lucky enough to have a very, successful career in multiple sectors and multiple industries, working with bigger organizations and smaller organizations, for-profit and non-profit and public sector, private sector. It's a very diversified experience. And during that time, as I've progressed, I guess, through my own learning and whatnot, and become good at this, I've been engaging, more and more with the C-suite and senior management of organizations. And that kind of gave me a very good insight into what happens in boardrooms, what happens with leaders when they come together to discuss really critical, complicated issues to how to move things forward. So that's what I've been doing lately as I've retired from my full-time career, focusing more on part-time engagements with like-minded organizations that I could really take them to the next level.
Awesome. And maybe you can coach me on the retirement thing early. If you have some time. So excited that you're in that season of life, working with boards and C-suite, great place to be amongst leaders and making a difference in how we do business. And we can transition that into part of this Conscious Corner conversation around conscious capitalism. So if I may, let me just take a few seconds for those that might be listening. And conscious capitalism, what is it? And, why are we having this conversation? So real quick, the idea of elevating humanity and doing good by leveraging a profitable business, right? We have to have profits in order to elevate humanity and do good. And certainly financial resources an aspect of that, but it's more than just that. And so this idea of doing good, elevating humanity, conscious capitalism, I love it. It's got 4 key tenets. One is a higher purpose. And I think our conversation today is really going to dovetail well into that is, business is a good means to achieving a greater purpose. And I know in your boardrooms, your conversations and around your latest book really focuses a lot on that. Stakeholder orientation, stakeholders. Are we talking about just shareholders? No, we're talking about all the stakeholders that impact a business for doing good, whether that's internal or external. And then we have conscious leaders. You were just talking about a passion that you have around working at the board level or the C-suite level, right? How are those leaders really focusing on creating value and aligning the common interests with all the stakeholders as a leader? And then lastly, how do you create that conscious culture where you're intentionally developing and promoting and advocating those values of conscious capitalism? So I hope that gives us a little jumping off point for you and I, and for those that are listening, just some context. So I want to start off with in your book, Abrar, that you wrote, you said MBI, or management, right, by intent, MBI, is a call for action to transform and recalibrate corporate culture through one, more accountability and transparent governance framework. And number two, an operational structure that is purpose driven. We just talked about that as 10. Tell us a little bit more, why, how did you come up with this? What's the why behind MBI, if you will?
Okay, great question. So I think I struggled for a long while when I was consulting with really, I guess, finding the meaning in the tasks that I was given by my clients and how they really impact at a social level beyond the organization. So a lot of times organizations, like, we know this, they've like focused on, narrowly on profitability. And if that's the focus, then you miss out on other things that an organization can really bring forward, like prosperity, right? And then, conscious capital, that's why I really love the whole idea behind conscious capitalism, is that it is kind of forcing you to think beyond just the short term. So I struggled early on in my career to just, how do you really tie those things together? It's one thing to have great efficiencies in your processes and, keen eye on your profits, but it's very difficult to tie the soul of the organization with the operations, right? So your intent and your actions kind of are aligned. And that's, when I really felt that I could bring something forward. And I spent quite a bit of time then researching that. And in my engagement with clients, poked around to figure out how best to, bring these two things together. And I found that it's very fascinating when the leadership team of an organization gets galvanized by a higher purpose, then you kind of see that the outcomes that they are aiming for really go beyond just, are we making profits or not? It kind of takes on this realm of, are we preventing harm or are we promoting good? So those are the two like major, I guess, focuses that they kind of focus in on or zero in on when that happens. Right. And I've noticed in organizations, when the leadership team is so focused on the greater good, that's when the environment is really ripe for the rest of the organization to get galvanized and get really creative and open and feel a sense of belonging and commitment to the organization. And that's when you see organizations really flourish and grow.
Awesome. I love that word, galvanized, and I can just hear it and see it in your body language and your tone that there's a lot of passion behind this. And you were leading with and dovetailing into that higher purpose. And I loved what you were saying about intent and action, right? And how those two need to be aligned. And then I was thinking back in terms of MBI, and you talk about some of these outcomes. If there's alignment, intent, action, leading with a higher purpose, right? You talk about how this leads to 5 critical principles, right? The preservation of life, reason, dignity, wealth, and future, right? Tell us a little bit more about those 5 and how or why did you come up with those 5?
Sure. So it's interesting. It's I guess it's my own spiritual journey, maybe over the years, that has maybe helped me connect with my inner self. And in the book, I really focused in on, at least try to emphasize the fact that it's more of an internal journey than an external one, right? I think plenty of philosophers talk about that internal journey being the more difficult and longer one than the external journey, right? So in what I've seen in our free enterprise system, which is, by the way, an awesome system, but it has been derailed because our focus have been, so myopically, I guess, zeroed in on the profitability aspect of it. So if profitability becomes your intent, then the actions most of the time are focused on material aspects. What are the material gains out of it? And then the outcomes that come out of this equation are more focused on societies or businesses focusing in on the value of profit, the value of material wealth, expansion of economies and that kind of stuff, which is needed. But if all the focus is on that, then we miss out on other things. So in the book, the intent was to really bring in this other equation where it's not just profitability, it's also prosperity. It's not just materialism, it's also human development. And the intent was that we would then have organizations or leaders that kind of understand the inner dynamics of how they internalize these balancing acts and come up with meaningful products and services that actually really serve the greater good and not add more fuel to the fire. And in this day and age, we kind of really need leadership to step up and take a totally different role than what we've been playing for the last 50, 60 years.
Awesome. Great insight. And thank you for those observations. So as you were describing these, one of the things that jumped out at me, Abrar, was as I was thinking about stakeholders, and I'm wondering, and I think you brought it home for me, sometimes we forget about the stakeholder me, right? The internalization, as you were describing that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and we should be self-reflective, and I think maybe consider ourselves, one of those stakeholders, right? I think that's valid and true. And you talked about it being a difficult journey at times. Would certainly agree with that. And the longer view, the longer ball, thinking baseball again, right? If you had one key insight about thinking of me as a leader and maybe internalizing that journey as you're describing, what might be one key insight you would like to maybe share or have our audience consider coming out of this?
So I guess the one key thing that I don't see enough leaders talking about. We see a lot about environmental, social governance. We see a lot about being transparent in our reporting and our disclosures and that kind of stuff. But what we don't see enough of is leaders really talking about a balanced way of looking at materiality, where you balance it with a little bit of stoicism. Mm-hmm. There's this, the yin yang thing going, and I think leaders need to now realize, given where we are, with climate change, with losing biodiversity, with all the pollution and all the political, throughout the world, the unrest that we see. And if you look at, I guess, the global risk report, right, of the World Economic Forum, every year, the kind of stuff that percolates to the top as far as priority risks to focus in on, it's mainly connected with the environment and with societies or people, right? So the one takeaway that I would have is really, if you are sincere about adopting conscious capitalism, and if you're really sincere about making sure that it permeates not just the leadership layer, but it goes all the way down to the nth level, then the metaphor that I have in the book is actually, it's not the wind that changes the essence of sand, right? The intensity of wind and its force really changed the sand dunes, but if you're just changing the sand dune from one area to the other, you're not changing the essence of it. It still stays the same. So conscious capitalism to me is about actually changing the essence of our free enterprise market system. So if you look at the desert analogy, what we're trying to do is to introduce a little bit of water into the system to change that essence of sand into an oasis or something else, right? So I think that is one takeaway, is that it can be done. There's plenty of, forces that are now focused in on this, but internally for leaders, the trick is to really understand how you internalize this and how you bring, that balance. So the organization is not just shoveling things around, which we see. You bring in big management and consulting firms, and that's all they tell you is like, oh, do this and do this organizational change, and you'll make, at the end of the day, the profit that you need to make. But it's not about that. It's about fundamentally transforming the organization. So, the takeaway is that how do you then balance that? And if the intent is really to add a little bit of water to the equation to turn sand into something else, then that should be the galvanizing force that moves you forward as an organization.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for that. I love how you were describing about if you want to embrace the essence, right, of management by intent, which dovetails beautifully into conscious capitalism, right? Take some of these ideas, some of these principles, and make that change happen, right? And I loved how you tied management by intent and some of the things that you've learned over the years, again, working with boards and leaders, about how that dovetail into the higher purpose, how that impacts stakeholders, how that helps leaders evolve, right? And then ultimately changing the culture or the essence, of an organization. So Abrar, fantastic conversation. I told you it'd go quick. And just to close this out, I want to give you a big shout out and thank you. If you want to connect with Abrar, go to managementbyintent.com, learn a little bit more about his book. Obviously, I'm going to put in a plug. If you haven't read it, please go get it. Some really good words in there, some great insights, some wisdom. And then, of course, if you want to learn a little bit more about conscious capitalism, go to consciouscapitalism.org. My name's Andrew Roush. Great to have you with us. Abrar, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Enjoyed it. We'll see you soon, okay?